Hey guys, welcome to another Kickster review. So today I'm going to be doing my full spoiler breakdown of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This is obviously the fifth entry in the Indiana Jones franchise starring Harrison Ford, and this is the fifth and final installment as part of the whole series of films. So this is obviously a full spoiler review, so I'm going to be going into all the details. So if you don't want any spoilers, check out now and go check out my quick out of the theater review. That gives you kind of my brief thoughts on the film without spoiling anything. But other than that, I'm just going to dive in, cover what I thought about the story and the characters. So without further ado, let's get started. So the basic premise is that Indy is brought back out of his basic retirement by a lady named Helena, who is his goddaughter, because she's caught up in a whole thing with the Nazis involving this thing known as the Dial of Antikythera, which is a mechanism that was supposedly designed by Archimedes that supposedly can cause time travel. And the main villain, whose name is Schmidt, he is a Nazi. His main goal with this mechanism is to use it to go back in time to basically change the fortunes of the war for the Nazis' favor. So basically to right Hitler's wrongs. And so this story takes him on adventures throughout the whole world to different places and even to the past, and basically culminates in the very end with a scene that's set basically in ancient Rome. And this is just to give you the full kind of encapsulation of what the story is and where it goes. And so there was a number of reasons why I actually did not like this film. I thought it was quite poor and quite a disappointment, even considering I actually had low expectations going in, and it somehow managed to actually come out worse than what I expected. And so the main thing I really disliked about this movie was the character Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She was just completely insufferable from the get-go, basically. She approaches Indy for his help, but then treats him like crap the whole time. And throughout the whole film, she undermines him almost at every turn, tries to show why she is better at everything than he is, but still wanting him to come along, but always kind of purposely showing him up. Like, we already know he's a sad old man. Why are you running him through this to just make him look even worse? It was a terrible decision to have this character as the main sidekick in this film. And in fact, she wasn't even the sidekick. She was basically the co-star of this film. And at times, it was actually Indy riding her coattails. They just tried to do too much with her character. They wanted her to be, the strong female. They wanted her to be the comedic relief. They wanted her to be the femme fatale. They wanted her to be the knowledgeable one. They tried to do too many of these things, and none of them hit because, one, she did not come across as convincing as like a leading woman, as an action star. She wasn't convincing with the comedy. None of the jokes really hit. She was not that attractive, so she can't really pass as a femme fatale. Just none of those things seem to hit. And obviously the knowledge side, Indy is the one who's meant to be the all-knowing one, and she's always kind of one-upping him in terms of her knowledge of everything archaeology. But then arguably the worst part of this film is when it actually decides near the very end that all of a sudden Helena's character really cares for Indy. Like, this is just comes out of thin air. It just does not make any sense in the moment. The setting is basically they have gone back in time. They were meant to go back to 1939 at the war, but instead the time takes them back to the time of Archimedes, which kind of reveals that this dial is basically a loop in time when they use it. It can't be traveled to any other time. It always goes back to then, which is something like 214 BC, I think. And in this scene, Indy arrives there, he's shot, and by the way, he's been shot for about 30 minutes at this point, and kind of the film almost kind of forgets it, because at one point it looks like he's about to die, but then now he's seemingly fine. It's all over the place. And then the worst possible thing happens all in this one scene, where one, you have Indy basically cowering and acting like a fool and just, timid and all these things, where he's basically saying he wants to stay here in the past because, my God, the past, look at this is history, this is amazing. But like, you think Indiana Jones, this is the last man on earth that would ever do something like this, because he knows the ramifications for meddling with the past. He would not want to meddle with the thing that he treasures so much. So he would know that better than anyone. And yet he's there cowering, saying, just leave me behind. I want to stay here. It just completely destroyed and annihilated his character in all of this decades of arc of his character from his previous movies, and just completely diminished all like that, if you accept this film as canon, which I don't. But then you look at Helena's character in that moment, and she's all of a sudden, she cares so much about Indy. She wants to bring him back to the present because she loves him so much. None of this was conveyed throughout the whole film. She was crapping on him the whole time, just putting him down and like she was always saying, showing off how she's better than him and everything, and yet now she can't live without him. It was so stupid, and basically it's solved. The whole climax of the film is her punching Indy in the face. This is literally the climax. It is ridiculous. She punches him to knock him out so that she can then take him back to the plane to then go back through that portal to the present. It was so bad. It was just completely, that whole scene just kind of sums up the whole film. Like, whilst the film was bad, that was especially bad, and it's like, I mean, almost deserving of what the whole film was to that point. I should speak a little bit about Indiana Jones in this film, because obviously he's the main character, supposedly, but I felt actually disappointed by Harrison Ford in this film. Yes, he's an old man. I know he's old, and he's 80 years old in real life. Like, so you're not going to get the same young Indy. I wasn't expecting that. But at the same time, he felt kind of disinterested at times. He seemed like it was more Harrison Ford, grouchy Harrison Ford on set than actual Indiana Jones. It just didn't feel right. But then things outside of his control, like the action scenes, they were kind of painful to watch at times, because they're making him run, they're making him punch, they're making him jump and do all these things. And you can just see he's an old man in real life. You know, he can't pull off the same moves, and it was painful to watch. It's you're almost cringing at times seeing some of the things he's trying to do. It just does not feel right. You're just thinking, this poor old man. Like, you shouldn't be feeling that way for Indy. We should be cheering him on in these awesome moments, but instead I was just cringing at, like, that must have hurt him to do that. And then you have the villain Schmidt, who I thought might have been the best part of this film going into it, because it was being played by Mads Mikkelsen, who's a really good actor. But even he was, I think, criminally underused. You know, they introduced him at the beginning, and I thought, okay, this could be good. And they had a nice kind of scene with him at the beginning where he's kind of showing his style of intimidation, but it just did not pay off throughout. Like, he just kind of would pop up when the story needed him to. His presence was not felt throughout this film. He wasn't. The performance was fine, but I felt like he was being held back by the script and the story. Like, it just was not bringing out the best of what Mads Mikkelsen can do as an actor, and particularly as a villainous actor, which he's done in many roles before. But this just didn't work here. It was barely passable in my eyes. And then you have a little kid in this film, Teddy, who's a little Moroccan boy. He's basically the short round of this film. He's a friend of Helena's, and that's how he comes into the fold. He's just kind of good at everything, but like nowhere near as fun or as like charismatic as Short Round in any way. He's just kind of there, and he just does things when they need him to. In fact, there literally is one scene where Helena asks him, can you fly that plane, a particular plane? And he says, I don't know if I can fly that one. And then she responds, yeah, because you can't fly any planes. You've never flown a plane. And he's like, well, why would you ask? Like, I'm thinking, why did you ask him the question if he could fly that plane if you know you can't fly any? It's like, it was just dumb dialogue like that. But then he ends up flying that plane, and not only does he fly, he flies it through a freaking storm and through a portal in time, and then flies it through while being shot at in the period with the Romans, and then he flies back again, obviously. So like, it's just dumb things happen constantly in this film for the sake of the story, like just to make things happen, and just convenience after convenience. So I've harped on a bit about the characters here, so I think I should actually touch on the story a bit to give you a sense of what it's like. So, you know, you've got the concept that they've got here with the Dial of Antikythera. It's a really interesting and cool concept. You know, the idea is that this mechanism was discovered, you know, supposedly had been designed back roughly 200 BC, but they, like, when they date it in terms of the technology, it's something that they wouldn't have expected for at least 1,000 or so years. So it felt like it was almost 1,000 years early in terms of the technology. It's basically a watch, or the first known watch, and it's like, wow, that's a cool concept, and they could have done a lot of cool things with that, but they just didn't hit it. Like, the story just was not engaging enough to suck us in and make us feel it. Like, I think that was kind of a directional fault, because these films are normally directed by Steven Spielberg, who's a master at just drawing you into a story and taking you along for a ride. And whilst James Mangold, this film's director, is a great director in his own right, I think he was trying to do his best impersonation of Spielberg, but just wasn't hitting the marks. It just wasn't paying off. And this film kind of feels like a recreation of an Indiana Jones film in a lot of ways. Like, they feel like, okay, this is an indie film, so we're obliged that we have to travel to like 4 countries before we get to the final act. It's like, well, okay, that's what it is. If that's what an indie film is to you, fine, but what was the actual purpose? Like, okay, they go to Morocco to basically for an auction of these artifacts. They go to Greece to do a scuba diving thing. They go to Italy to find the cave. Like, it just felt like they wanted to go to these different places and they just had to find a way to take them there. Nothing felt natural, everything felt forced. It was just like convenience after convenience for the sake of moving the plot forward. And yeah, look, there was nothing about this film deserved its own existence or justified its own existence. You know, people complain about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull being unnecessary. We could debate all day about that, but at least that one had a happy ending. And so this one, I'm going to talk about the ending now. When Indy comes back from the past and he's alive and Helena's there, the ending is that Marion, his wife, or now his divorced wife, comes back in and is willing to take him back. And it's like, where did that come from? That wasn't referenced at all throughout the whole film. And by the way, they mentioned earlier in the film that Mutt, played by Shia LaBeouf in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, is now dead, which is part of Indy's depression. And Marion left him because of that and all these things that Indy had going on. But the ending of this film, she walks right into his apartment and said, "Oh, I heard you're better now." Like, what the hell? There was no build up to this. There was no justification for this ending. And then the ending is that basically this recreation of the scene from Raiders where he's saying, "Where does it hurt?" Kissing this elbow, kissing different places, whatever. And that's the end of the film. And like, why? It looked like they were two old people. They look very old now. And they're in like a retirement kitchen, like a retirement home in their little old rundown kitchen. It's like such a depressing little sight for them. And you're thinking, well, how is that ending any better to the ending we got from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Complain about that movie all you want, but that was Indy being Indy, and it was a happy family unit at the end. You know, he marries his love of his life. He has a son now. He's happy. With this one, okay, he's only reunited with his wife who was divorcing him. He no longer has a son, and he just looks like a sad old man. Like there was no reason for this film to exist. Didn't further the story in any way. We didn't learn anything more about Indy. It's just it was a cash grab, and which is ironic because this movie is set to lose a lot of money. Whilst I mentioned already the Dail itself and the concept of it, how I actually kind of liked the concept, but unfortunately they didn't pay it off. The other things I did kind of like about the film was I thought it had good production quality. You know, all the sets looked really good. They looked like classic indie kind of sets. And you could see they invested a lot of time and effort into making these things look real. The other thing I liked was time travel. You know, is always a dicey kind of territory to go into with the film, but particularly with the indie film, which has never done it before. But I thought the way they did it was kind of cool, and it was kind of a nice twist in that, you know, we're all expecting them to go back to 1939 during the war, World War II, but ends up going back to the time of Archimedes, and they're right in the thick of a battle on the shores of Italy with the Romans, and like that was like just whilst there's problems with it, it looked cool to see. Like it was a kind of a cool sight, and the thought of Indy facing the past. There's so much you could do with that, and they just didn't do it. It was so shoehorned in at the end. There was not enough time with it at all. And you didn't get to they didn't build it up enough throughout the film to make it feel like what would happen, how would Indy actually respond in these circumstances. It's like it's just more, he just ended up being a cowering old man wanting to die because he loves the past like that. But they didn't set that up throughout the whole film, so we didn't buy it, and it was just a terrible ending. So yeah, look, at the end of the day, Indy's character didn't die. He's alive at the end and has a kind of happy ending again, but completely unnecessary one, and did nothing to further the story of Indiana Jones. Ultimately, this is a very forgettable final entry in this franchise. Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, ruined this movie in a lot of ways, and yeah, it's sad to see it go this way, but I'm not completely surprised based on what Lucasfilm has done with their own property of Star Wars. And this has kind of done the same treatment again of just ruining their own franchise. And yeah, it's sad, but I can kind of disregard this film and just enjoy the previous ones, which I adore. And so yeah, look, those are my thoughts on the film. I'm not going to go into too much more detail than that. I think you've got the picture of how I feel. So I gave this film a 3 out of 10, and I'm sticking by it. It is a bad film. Unfortunate because it had some potential in places, but just a bad film. But I feel it was always going to be behind the 8 ball in the sense that Indy was so old. There was not much you could really do with Harrison Ford in this film to make it anywhere comparable to the original Indy film. So yeah, look, it's just a bad film. And so that's my thoughts. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below. What did you think of the film? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was fine? Whatever you think. Please like my video if you're enjoying it, and please subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying my content. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.